"Are you lost, Grandpa?" The voice was sharp. It was young. It was laced with the kind of casual arrogance that came from being 22 years old, clad in the multicam pattern of the United States Army, and certain of one's place in the universe. The old man did not look up. He remained seated on the simple metal bench, his hands resting on the knobby head of a worn wooden cane. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the heat shimmered off the long, black tarmac of Fort Bragg. He watched the C-17s, great gray beasts of the sky, lumbering through their pre-flight checks. The sound of their engines was a low, familiar hum, a song he had known his entire life. "Sir, I'm talking to you." The voice was closer now. Specialist Corbin, name tape stitched neatly over his right breast pocket, stepped directly in front of the old man, blocking his view. Two other Rangers, younger even than Corbin, flanked him. They smirked, enjoying the show. They were coiled springs of muscle and kinetic energy, fresh from a grueling training exercise on Range 37. Sweat still beaded on their temples. The scent of cordite and red Carolina clay clung to them. The old man on the bench was their antithesis. He was a study in stillness, a relic in a world of hypersonic motion. His clothes were simple, faded denim trousers, a plain, light blue button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows with a neatness that spoke of long practice. His face was a roadmap of a life lived outdoors, etched with deep lines around his eyes and mouth. His hair was thin and white, a stark contrast to the sun-darkened skin of his scalp. He looked like someone's grandfather who had taken a wrong turn on his way to the fishing hole and somehow ended up in the heart of the 82nd Airborne Division's operational hub. "This is a restricted area," Corbin stated, puffing out his chest slightly. "Authorized personnel only." "You're not authorized." The old man finally, slowly, lifted his gaze. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky. They held a profound and unsettling calm. They did not seem surprised. They did not seem intimidated. They just were. "I'm waiting," the old man said. His voice was quiet, a dry rustle of leaves. Corbin scoffed. "Waiting? Waiting for what?" "The early bird special at the mess hall." His buddies chuckled. The old man's gaze drifted past Corbin, back toward the flight line. "For a friend?" "Right. A friend." Corbin rolled his eyes. "Look, Pop, I don't have time for games. I need to see your ID and your access pass." Now, the old man made no move. He simply continued to sit, his posture one of infinite patience. This stillness, this utter lack of reaction, was more infuriating to Corbin than any argument would have been. It was a quiet defiance that grated on his high-strung, action-oriented nerves. He was a ranger. He gave orders, and people moved. Instantly. This old statue was breaking the rules of his world. "Did you hear me?" Corbin's voice grew louder, sharper. "ID pass. Let's go." From a distance, leaning against the brick wall of a barracks, Sergeant First Class Reyes watched the encounter. Reyes was a career soldier, a man who had seen the arrogant bluster of 1,000 young specialists come and go. He was on a smoke break, his first moment of peace in a 12-hour day. Something about the scene made the hairs on his arms stand up. It wasn't just the young bucks hassling a civilian. That was common enough. It was the old man. It was the way he Saturday. It was a posture Reyes had seen before, but only in very specific men. It was a stillness born not of weakness or age, but of a deep, settled power. A man who had nothing left to prove to the world, or to himself. "I don't have a pass," the old man said calmly. "No pass." Corbin let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Then how in the hell did you get on base? Did you wander in through a hole in the fence?" "I was invited," the old man replied, his voice still that same quiet monotone. "Invited? By who?" "The base commander? You and the general, best pals." I'm sure the sarcasm was thick, dripping with condescension. Corbin leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Let me tell you what I think. I think you're a confused old man who's wandered where he shouldn't. And I'm about 2 seconds from cuffing you and letting the MP sort you out." It was then that Corbin noticed it. As the old man's sleeve had shifted, A tattoo was revealed on his weathered forearm. It was not the usual military fare. No screaming eagles, no unit crests, no skulls or daggers. It was a strange, faded design, the ink blurred by decades of sun and age. It looked like a shepherd's crook, the curved head facing downward. Intertwined with it was a thin, coiled serpent, its head resting near the crook's tip. The ink was a deep, almost black-green, a color Reyes had never seen in a modern tattoo parlor. Corbin smirked, seeing a new avenue for his mockery. He reached out and, without permission, grabbed the old man's thin arm. "What's this supposed to be?" he sneered, his thumb rubbing over the faded ink. "Little Bo Peep, lose his snake." The moment Corbin's thumb touched the tattoo, the world shifted for the old man. The sound of the jet engines faded. The scent of hot asphalt was replaced by the smell of wet earth and rot. The thick, cloying smell of a jungle floor that never saw the sun. The Carolina heat vanished, replaced by a chilling, constant rain. He felt the familiar weight of the pack on his back, the slick, cold steel of his rifle in his hands. It was not an M4. It was heavier, stranger, a custom-built weapon that fired silent, subsonic rounds. He heard a voice in his ear, not through a radio, but a whisper from the man beside him in the mud. "Shepard, they're coming." He heard the soft thwip of his own weapon and the wet, heavy sound of a body falling into the muck 100 yards away. He saw the eyes of his brother, Miguel, the serpent tattoo stark on his own arm as he bled out in a Laotian swamp, a place America swore it had never been. "You protect the flock," Miguel had whispered, his last breath a bloody cough. "That's the crook. You're the serpent in the grass that protects them. Never forget, Elias." The flashback lasted only a second, but it was a lifetime. Elias Vance blinked, the pale blue of his eyes suddenly sharp, focused, and infinitely weary. He looked at the young soldier's hand on his arm. He said nothing, but Corbin felt it, a sudden, inexplicable chill, a feeling of being weighed, measured, and found wanting by a power he could not comprehend. He snatched his hand back as if burned. "Whatever, old man," he stammered, covering his unease with more aggression. "You're done. I'm calling the MPs." Across the way, Sergeant Reyes had seen enough. He had seen Corbin grab the old man. He had seen the flicker in the old man's eyes. It was a look he had only ever seen in the eyes of old Delta operators, the quiet professionals from the dawn of SOCOM. Reyes crushed his cigarette under his boot. His gut screamed at him that this was wrong. All of it was wrong. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call the MPs. He had a different number, one he was only supposed to use in a dire emergency. The personal cell of General Armitage's executive aide, a colonel he had served with in Afghanistan. The colonel answered on the first ring, his voice annoyed. "Reyes, this had better be important." "Colonel, sorry to bother you, sir," Reyes said, keeping his voice low, turning his back to the confrontation. "I'm over by Hangar 4. There's a situation." "What kind of situation?" "Some of the 75th guys are hassling a civilian, an old man." There was a sigh on the other end. "And you're calling me for that?" "Let the MPs handle it, Sergeant. The general is in a critical briefing." "Sir, with respect, I don't think the MPs are the right call here," Reyes insisted, his gut twisting into tighter knot. "There's something about this guy. He's calm, too calm, and the Rangers are escalating." "What does he look like?" the colonel asked, a hint of professional curiosity now in his tone. "Old, sir. Maybe 80. White hair, wearing civilian clothes. Looks like he could be blown over by a stiff breeze." "Name?" "Don't know, sir. They're asking for his ID, but he's not complying." "Then it's an MP issue, Reyes." "I'm busy," the colonel was about to hang up. "He has a tattoo, sir," Reyes said quickly, playing his last card. "On his forearm. It's strange. A shepherd's crook, intertwined with a snake." The other end of the line went utterly, completely silent. Reyes held his breath. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was static. He thought the colonel had hung up. When the voice came back, it was completely transformed. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a tone of absolute, ice-cold urgency. It was a voice Reyes had never heard from the man before. "Sergeant," the colonel said, his words clipped and precise. "What was it you said about the tattoo?" "A crook and a serpent, sir. Faded. Greenish ink." Reyes could hear muffled shouting in the background on the colonel's end. A door slamming open. "Reyes, listen to me very carefully." The colonel's voice was now tight with controlled panic. "Do not let that man leave. Do not let those Rangers touch him again. Stall them. Do whatever you have to do. The general is coming. I repeat, General Armitage is en route to your location. Now." The line went dead. Reyes stared at his phone, a cold dread mixing with a profound sense of validation. He had been right. He turned back to the scene. Corbin had his own phone out, no doubt calling the military police. Reyes pushed himself off the wall and began walking toward them, his stride long and purposeful. He had to stall. He just had to buy a few minutes. "Corbin," Reyes called out, his voice calm but carrying the authority of his rank. "Stand down." Corbin looked up, surprised. "Sergeant, this is a security breach. The old man has no ID, no pass." "I heard you," Reyes said, stopping a few feet away. "I said stand down. I'll handle this." "But Sarge, that was an order, specialist," Reyes said, his voice dropping a full octave. Corbin's mouth snapped shut. He was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He knew the tone of a career NCO who was not to be trifled with. He lowered his phone and took a step back, gesturing for his men to do the same. Reyes gave the old man a respectful nod. "Sir, Sergeant First Class Reyes. Apologies for the confusion. Can I ask your name?" The old man looked at Reyes, his pale eyes seeming to see right through him. "Vance," he said simply. "Elias Vance." Before Reyes could respond, a sound cut through the air. It was the high-pitched squeal of tires on pavement, a sound that did not belong on a military base where speed limits were strictly enforced. Heads turned. A convoy of 3 black, government-issue SUVs was tearing down the access road toward them, moving at a speed that was both reckless and terrifyingly purposeful. They didn't slow down until the last possible second, screeching to a halt in a perfectly executed formation, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. The doors of the lead vehicle flew open. Out stepped General Marcus Armitage. He was a 4-star general, the commander of the entire Joint Special Operations Command. He was a man spoken of in hushed, reverent tones in every corner of the armed forces. A living legend. He was not in his dress uniform. He was in his daily operational fatigues, but the 4 silver stars on his collar glittered in the harsh sunlight. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. His eyes, dark and piercing, scanned the scene, bypassing Corbin, bypassing Reyes, and locking onto the seated figure of Elias Vance. The entire area fell silent. Soldiers stopped their work. Conversations died. The only sound was the distant whine of the jet engines and the crunch of General Armitage's boots on the gravel as he strode forward. His command staff and security detail scrambled to keep up, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. The general walked with a purpose that was terrifying to behold. He ignored Corbin and his stunned Rangers as if they were statues. He gave a curt, dismissive wave to Sergeant Reyes, who had instinctively snapped to attention. He walked directly to the bench. He stopped 2 feet in front of the old man. The 4-star general, a man who advised presidents and commanded the most elite warriors on the planet, stood ramrod straight. His eyes, which had been filled with fury, softened as he looked down at the frail figure. A flicker of something profound, awe, respect, emotion, passed across his stern features. Then, in a move that sent a shockwave through the assembled onlookers, General Armitage brought his right hand up in the sharpest, most perfect salute of his storied career. His arm was ramrod straight, his fingers perfectly aligned. It was a salute of ultimate, profound respect. A salute a general gives to a Medal of Honor recipient or to a fallen soldier. "Mr. Vance," General Armitage's voice boomed across the tarmac, thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. "It is an honor, sir, an absolute honor." Elias Vance looked up at the general and gave a slow, slight nod of his head. "Marcus," he said, his voice a quiet acknowledgement. "You've gotten old." A small, genuine smile touched the general's lips before vanishing. He held his salute. Corbin and his men could only stare, their jaws slack with disbelief. This was impossible. This broke every rule of protocol, of rank, of reality as they knew it. General Armitage finally, slowly, lowered his hand. He then turned, not fully, but just enough to fix his cold, furious gaze upon Specialist Corbin. The full weight of 4 stars of command authority descended on the young ranger. Corbin felt like he was shrinking, the air being crushed from his lungs. "You," the general said, his voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register that was far more terrifying than any shout. "What is your name, Specialist?" "Corbin, sir," he stammered, his own voice sounding like a pathetic squeak. "Specialist Corbin," the general said, his words like chips of ice. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" "No, sir." "He had no ID, sir. He was in a restricted." "I did not ask for your excuse." The general cut him off. "I asked you if you know who this is." "No, sir." The general took a step toward him. "Of course you don't. They don't teach the real history anymore. They don't tell the stories of the men who built the very ground you stand on with their blood and their sacrifice." He turned to address the entire crowd of soldiers who had now gathered, drawn by the commotion. "You men," he began, his voice rising again, filled with a raw, passionate power. "You think you're tough. You think the 75th Ranger Regiment is the peak of the pyramid. You are elite, but you are elite because of men like this." He gestured back to Elias Vance, who was still sitting calmly on the bench. "This is Elias Vance. To most of you, that name means nothing. But in the circles where real legends are whispered, he has another name. They called him the Shepherd." A murmur went through the crowd. The name sounded like something from a myth. In the 1960s, in a war we weren't in a country that wasn't on any official map, there was a unit. It had no name, no number. It was a ghost. They were called Task Force Serpent. There were only 12 of them, 12-inch. The general's eyes bored into Corbin. They were sent into places that were considered impossible. Their job was to go deep behind enemy lines, deeper than anyone had ever gone, to rescue downed pilots and extract intelligence assets. They were the flock. And this man, he pointed again at Elias, was their shepherd. For 3 years, he and his team operated in conditions you cannot even imagine. They had no support, no air cover, no rescue. They were completely, utterly on their own. If they were caught, the United States government would deny their very existence. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The tattoo you so casually mocked, Specialist," the general's voice dripped with contempt, "is their mark. The shepherd's crook to lead the lost home. The serpent for the silent lethality required to protect them. Every man in that unit had one. And of the 12 who went in, he is the only one who came out." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Every eye was now on Elias Vance, seeing not an old man, but a living ghost, a monument to a forgotten war. "This man," the general continued, his voice cracking with emotion, "is personally credited with saving the lives of 32 American servicemen who were left for dead. One of them was a young fighter pilot named Captain Frank Armitage. My father." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "My father was shot down over the Annamite Range. He was broken, hunted, and days from death. And out of the jungle, like a phantom, came the shepherd and his men. They carried my father for 50 miles through enemy territory to a clandestine extraction point. He never would have come home. I never would have been born." None of this, he swept his arm to indicate the entire base, the entire apparatus of modern special operations, would exist as it does today without the lessons learned from the sacrifices of men like him. He turned his full, undivided attention back to Corbin. The fury in his eyes was a white-hot flame. "You put your hands on him," it was not a question. It was a statement of damnation. "You, in the uniform he bled for, stood here on the soil he consecrated with his courage, and you disrespected him. You mistook age for weakness. You mistook quiet for confusion. You saw a hero, a living legend, and you treated him like a trespasser. Corbin was white as a sheet, trembling. Sir, I didn't know. You didn't know, the general roared, the sound echoing off the hangars. Your ignorance is not an excuse. It is your crime. It is your duty to know. It is your duty to see beyond the surface, to respect your elders, to understand that the only reason you have the privilege of wearing that uniform is because men like Elias Vance wrote the check for it with their entire lives. The general stepped so close his face was inches from Corbin's. You have disgraced yourself. You have disgraced your unit. And you have disgraced this army. He turned to Sergeant Reyes. Sergeant, get the names of this specialist and his entire fire team. Yes, sir, Reyes said, his voice crisp. They are all effective immediately on remedial duty. They will report to the JSOC archives at 0500 tomorrow. Their task will be to read and transcribe, by hand, every single declassified after-action report from Operation Pale Serpent. They will learn the name of every man who served with Mr. Vance. They will learn the details of every man he saved. They will continue this duty until they can recite that history in their sleep. He looked back at Corbin, and you will personally write a 10,000-word essay on the meaning of humility and respect. Perhaps then you'll learn that a warrior's worth is not measured by the youth in his limbs, but by the fire in his soul. The general paused, his chest heaving. Furthermore, a new mandatory training module will be added to the Ranger Indoctrination Program. It will focus on the history of deniable operations and the legacy of our quiet professionals. It will be called the Vance Protocol. With that, he turned his back on the humiliated Rangers. He walked back to Elias, his demeanor softening once more. Elias, I apologize. I'm so sorry for the disrespect you were shown. The old man looked up, a faint, sad smile on his lips. He reached out a frail hand and placed it on the general's arm. They're just boys, Marcus, he said softly. They don't know any better. It's the burden of the old to remember, so the young can be strong. The simple act of grace seemed to break the general. He bowed his head for a moment, composing himself. Your ride is ready, sir, he said, his voice regaining its composure. We're holding the flight for you. General Armitage helped Elias Vance to his feet. The old man moved slowly, leaning on his cane. The general of JSOC walked beside him, matching his pace, shortening his own powerful stride to accommodate the old warrior's slower gait. They walked toward the waiting C-17, a four-star general acting as a humble escort for a forgotten hero in a faded blue shirt. Every soldier on that tarmac, from the lowest private to the highest-ranking officer, snapped to attention. They held their salutes until the two men disappeared up the ramp of the massive aircraft. Specialist Corbin stood frozen, the weight of his shame a physical burden. He had never felt so small in his entire life. Months passed. Corbin and his team completed their duty in the archives. They read the stories. They learned the names. They touched the faded, typewritten pages that detailed acts of impossible courage. The experience changed him. The arrogance was gone, sandblasted away by the humbling truth of history. It was replaced by a quiet, somber respect. One Saturday afternoon, Corbin was in a small, off-base diner, nursing a cup of coffee. The bell over the door jingled, and in walked Elias Vance. He was alone. He moved to a small booth in the corner, nodding to the waitress who seemed to know him. Corbin's heart pounded in his chest. He took a deep breath, stood up, and walked over to the old man's table. Elias looked up, his pale blue eyes showing a flicker of recognition. Mr. Vance, Corbin began, his voice barely a whisper. He stood stiffly at attention. Sir, I wanted to apologize, sincerely, for my conduct that day. There is no excuse for my ignorance or my disrespect. I was wrong, and I am truly, deeply sorry. Elias Vance looked at the young ranger for a long moment. He saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. He saw the change. He gestured to the seat opposite him. Sit down, son. Corbin hesitated, then slid into the booth. Elias stirred his own coffee. The hardest mission, he said, his voice a low rustle, is the one you fight against yourself, against your own pride. Looks like you're winning that 1 inch. He took a sip of his coffee. Respect isn't about knowing who someone is, the old shepherd said, his gaze distant, as if seeing a faraway jungle. It's about understanding that you don't know. It's about treating every soul you meet as if they've fought a war you know nothing about. Because most of them have. He looked at Corbin, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. Lesson learned? Corbin nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Yes, sir, he said. Lesson learned.